Hey guys, Akiba back for another episode of the Slate Cast. Today we're going to be talking to the Director for Growth at BNB Chain, Alvin Kan, who thinks Web3 is casual yet hardcore. I'm going to run the intro and then let's see what he means by that. Alvin, my friend, how are you doing this morning?
Hey, all good. Thanks for inviting.
No, thanks for coming on. So you're the director for growth at BNB Chain. I believe your previous role was at LinkedIn doing growth and research and analysis there. So one of the first things I wanted to just get into, because I actually see this as being one of the most important things in Web3, which is talented people from Web2 moving over into the space to help with the business side of operations in Web3. Because I think there's a lot of innovation, a lot of growth, a lot of really clever developers, but it is pretty clear, and I think FTX is the prime example of it, whether it was malicious or not, there was a complete failure in operations, risk management. Actually, FTX wasn't a business. They were using QuickBooks for their accounting, for God's sake. Like at that level, it just isn't okay. And I know you wrote a fairly lengthy and really great blog post on LinkedIn about working in Web3. And within that, you said that Web3 is casual yet hardcore. Do you want to expand on a little bit more about that for us and just explain how you see the differences between working in Web2 to Web3?
Sure. So casual yet hardcore. I think if you look at just the crypto or Web3 culture in nature, it's pretty casual, right? I've been in few industries before. I was from the government and then, in LinkedIn and so on. And I think this is probably the only culture where it's in a way slack in that way. I'll call it casual. And a lot of business meetings are really not so formal, right? It's really about the business rather than, appearing with suits and pants and so on. Yet it's hardcore because there's so much that you need to know. And, it's a lot very focused on technology. I do feel that sometimes whether you're from a non-tech background coming in, there's a lot to learn actually, right? And everything is at the nascent stage. So it always starts from technology and then moving out to the commercial aspects. So it's hardcore in a way where you have to know a lot of things and how everything is kind of integrated together. That is a bit. And there is also this, persistent kind of chasing for what's the next better thing, like how do we improve what we have currently? Because again, everything is at a very early stage of adoption. How do we get the next level of adoption? How do we get the next billion users in? So there is always these questions lingering up in the background, right? And going for the next thing.
So in terms of obviously BNB Chain being an EVM compatible chain, what specific areas in terms of growth are you most focused on at the moment?
Yep. I actually realized I didn't answer about the Web 2 to Web 3 thing. Let me answer that first because that is very interesting. I was with LinkedIn for 9 years, right? And I started off, I think that was 2012. So it was still kind of growing. It was big in US, but very, very small and unheard of in Asia at the time. And because of that 9 years of history, I actually managed to see how a startup-ish kind of culture, an organization actually grew into a very mature and big organization, which I feel is something that is quite lacking in today's Web3 organizations, right? Because many of us are still startups. So how do we make sure that proper structures are in place, right? Risk management is in place. How do we ensure that, the proper partnership processes and so on, like everything has to be laid out in, I wouldn't say we don't want to be inflexible in a way, but we have to build in such a way that is scalable, right? Not just hitting the next million, but how about hitting the next 100 million users? And how does the organization look like at a foundational level? So that is kind of the biggest takeaway I've got from, coming from the Web 2 world into Web 3.
So then building onto that, what now are you focused on in terms of growth with that in mind with BNB?
Sure. DeFi will still be a very core component, right? I think of any chain actually, because when you think about, people mention like GameFi, SocialFi, a lot is back down to the financial aspects. And so having, the DeFi infrastructure in place, whether it's lending and borrowing, whether it's a financialization of NFTs, whether it's a liquidity that's on the market itself, that economy must be kind of backed by finance itself. as I always say, if you look at any kind of country economy, right, this country could be big in like tourism, that country could be big in gaming and so on, but there must be the basic banking infrastructure that has to be there. And I think this is the same for any kind of L1 or even L2 economy. That's one. I think the other one I'm really, really excited about is SocialFi, and it's still so early in the game right now. And coming from social media myself, very excited about, thinking about how people can have ownership over the data, right? How do you trade this data? How do you actually be able to monetize the data and own it across like multiple platforms? And then, then you go to the notion of DIDs and social graphs. I find that to be very exciting. Not sure if anyone has heard the news yesterday, the big news about BNB Chain announcing Greenfield, which is kind of the third blockchain focused on decentralized storage. So we can talk about that later, but I'm very, very excited about this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a big fan of Lens Protocol, which is on Polygon. Is there? I don't believe there's anything sort of equivalent on sort of the BNB chain at the moment. Is there?
We're still building. So there are projects, for example, CyberConnect essentially is a social graph. I think what is lacking right now is we want builders to come in and build the application layers on top of the social graph, right?
Yeah.
And that is where the real use case is. We are actually organizing some hackathons based on this, and we should be able to see, some really good use cases there.
Yeah, for certain. Yeah, I mean, the first time that I logged into my second sort of social media app on Lens, it really blew me away. Like the idea of having all of your content, all of your profile, all of your followers across on a different platform, not just your profile, but all of your actual content as well. And then it's down to the content, the platform to decide what sorts of content from the social graph they show. I just love the concept. And I think Damus launched yesterday on Nostra, which is Jack's whole thing with Bitcoin. I think that's really interesting. So yeah, I'm completely with you. I think that's a space that I feel it's still very, very new and very novel. But I think it's something that's going to come, especially with everything that's going on with Twitter at the moment. But I wanted to just then use that as the segue in that one of the biggest competitors, surely, at least publicly, for BNB is Polygon in terms of usage. And I actually completed an article a couple of days ago at a time where Polygon's daily transactions went above BNB chains for one of the first times. Whereas Polygon seeing a bit of an uptick at the moment in terms of daily transactions. BNB's still kind of within a bear market and seeing a bit of a downward trend. Do you feel that, is there any reason that you can see for a fall in transaction volume on BNB chain? Do you actually see that as bullish? Is it part of maybe culling some of the kind of crap projects in terms of like, there's obviously like you go onto like PancakeSwap and there's a million scam tokens and a lot of them do use BSC. So I think there's a lot of work being done there to help on that, which I think is great. But main question being here though, so how do you view competition in the space? Do you see it as bullish? Do you see it as something that is a challenge you need to overcome?
I think competition, we don't really view it as like direct competition because again, if you look at the pie, right, the pie is really like the Web3 pie is small, but if you look at the pie that we can all get together, it's really huge, right? I think there was a post that said that if you combine all the daily active users across like all the public L1s, if I'm not wrong, it's about maybe 2 million, 3 million. BSC today, I think we have about 1 million daily active users, which is more than, I think, double or even triple, probably double at least of the second in line. So I think the numbers are small, right, across any of the Web3 economies. And the focus really is about how do we grow that pie? How do we get more of the users on Web2, right? Whether it's, people like my wife, my parents, my friends, how do we get them into Web3? And that is a much bigger pie that everyone should be going after. With regards to, I think if you look at 1 year ago versus today, one of the things that I'm always very proud of is if you look at the lineup of games, say we were having this conversation 1 year ago, let's look at the lineup of games on BSC versus like now. It's entirely different, right? So we've been working very hard on getting the quality pipeline of games or social dApps or DeFi protocols coming on board. So really excited about that. And I think the other thing is when we look at competition, it's actually good to see many different L1s and L2s looking at different parts of Web3 adoption, right? So, for example, I think Polygon has done well, of course, in the NFT and Web2 use cases, right? Arbitrum and derivatives and so on. And so it's good to see all these experiments happening across the chains, because we are so new, right? This industry is so new. You don't know actually which parts can actually grow with Web3 itself. For BNB Chain, we do want to be kind of a general use case chain, but sometimes it's hard to have every kind of use case on one chain. So one major thing that we're pushing for is what we call a multi-chain strategy. So it may not be that everyone is familiar with it, but we have BSC, which I would call the main EVM chain and the capital, like the financial capital of the entire BNB chain ecosystem, right? We have, of course, the governance beacon chain. We announced ZK BNB, which would be the ZK chain, and it's in testnet right now, probably going mainnet in about March or April. Already a few kind of games are eyeing it, and we have it in the pipeline. Yesterday was Greenfield, which is a data availability layer looking at decentralized storage. So as we build, and we're not done yet, we want to build a whole ecosystem, because when we talk to developers, right, what we realize they want is options, right? Some people may be happy with BSC, and we have a lot of capacity there. Today, if you look at, say, the TPS that we can reach, we are actually very confident of housing, I think, up to about 2,200 TPS today, which is pretty high for EVM. But then there are games who wants like a ZK kind of roll-up chain where you have that security, but it's easy to build through SDKs. And then that's why we built the ZK BNB. And then there are others who wants an kind of an end-to-end data availability layer, right? Together with like your decentralized music, decentralized publishing platforms. And that's why we have Greenfield. So that's why we're trying to build a multi-chain ecosystem to be able to house these different use cases for developers.
Fantastic. So with
that
that,
was a long answer.
Yeah, no, really, really, really useful. And then sort of building on that, I mean, I definitely don't want this to be seen as kind of attacking, because I'm going to go here for another. It's another question that I know the audience often has around BNB. As you kind of start to understand more chains and read about them, one of the things I've heard time and time again is that people are worried about using BNB Chain, saying that it's centralized due to the validator set, which is kind of, it's like a permissioned validator set. I think the best way to put it is, do you see it as a centralized chain, and does the team at BNB see that as being something that's holding you back, or is it actually something that you find useful?
Yep. So we see the decentralization as a journey, right? It's a range, right? It's not black and white. It's not like a chain is centralized or decentralized. There is a whole range to that, and that's why you have things like the Nakamoto score. So we believe it's a journey, and we started in a way where we want to make it practical, right? If you look at the trilemma that people talk about, there are compromises, right? It's not like full decentralization has everything there. But today, we have already increased, I think, our validator set. As of mid of last year, we had about 21 active validators. Today, we are at 26. So we made the announcement that we're going to increase this over time. And I think by the end of the year, we should be looking at about 41, right? So we are further, yeah, it is. And eventually, maybe even up to 100, right? So we are further decentralizing. But I think it is important to note, again, it's a journey. We also look at the Nakamoto score, right? And if you look at it, I think there's a report coming out soon, and it's increased from, I think, 7 to 8, which basically is the score is basically how many validators it takes, right, to take down the network. And if you look at that score itself, 8 is actually somewhere in the median, right? So, but do we want to stay there? We don't, right? We want to further decentralize, because we're pretty passionate about that.
You know what? I couldn't agree more. Like, I have a very similar view around decentralization. I think an element of centralization early on in a project is actually way more beneficial, given that as you said, like, this is still so early. Essentially, for me, Web3 as an ecosystem is still in beta. So if this is still a big open live beta where people are putting hundreds of billions of dollars into it, it is nice as you're growing if there is an element of centralization that can help steer things in a direction, as long as there's a clear plan that gets followed through that increases decentralization as it becomes a necessity. So I'm actually with you on that. I do think that's the right sort of play. And I think with that, in terms of sort of growth, one of the things I wanted to then touch on is the Uniswap integration. This must be quite a sort of a big moment around the space. Obviously, PancakeSwap being one of the lead indexes for BNB over the years, Uniswap being sort of probably the most well known. How has that changed the way that you think about the ecosystem, and is that a part of what you were talking around your multi-chain plan?
Yep. I think since somewhere around like Q3, Q4, we started to see a lot more interest in BNB Chain, which I think, hopefully, I believe is also a reflection of all the stuff and efforts that we've been putting in to really show that we're opening up to all the developers. If you have been tracking the kind of number of hackathons or developer programs we've been putting out, or just pure representation at like different parts of the world, we've actually been increasing that a lot, right? So we've taken the feedback, we've gone out, we want to open up. And if you look at, say, end of last year in December, I think OpenSea came and integrated on the BNB chain, which I think people have been asking for a long time. In January, last month itself, right, Trader Joe came. So I think we're starting to see a lot more interest in BNB chain, which is great. But more importantly, we want to open up, right, to not just builders who are building their first projects, but builders from other chains who are looking to expand. Because we are also at a place where if I always say, since I came from a government background as well, it's like you have, good local companies and you want them to export, right, and expand their presence in other countries. And this will ultimately happen, right? A lot of dApps are going to go cross-chain. And what we want, as part of the ecosystem, when I look at it, is we want options, right? As a user, we want people maybe to be able to use PancakeSwap, but maybe they have preferences for Uniswap and others. And ultimately, it also comes down to the type of services and the capabilities and competencies, right? Uniswap with V3 is going to be, capital efficient. So we want that kind of options for users, and that's where we're coming from. And I think it's good. The best part about it is these are community initiated, right? So it's good to see the community, whether it's from Uniswap or other dApps, actually putting out these governance proposals, involving us, involving the community to come in and talk about.
Fantastic. And I think alongside that growth, it's hard to ignore the fact that BNB and Binance are obviously intertwined, and following everything that happened in 2022, the collapse of centralized exchanges, the fact that Binance's position within there and how solid it's been throughout, and how vocal and engaged CZ has been within the sort of the conversation. Obviously, Binance has come out looking arguably quite good throughout the situation with their risk management. I was on a space with CZ the other day that talked about the AI tools that Binance uses for risk management, which I think could be part of a reason for setting itself apart from some of the competition. But obviously, then they're not the same thing. Binance and BNB Chain have their own structure. But a lot of people will still see, and in all honesty, I'm one of these people that sees holding BNB tokens as a kind of proxy way to invest or get exposure to Binance. So the first part of this question is how do you sort of view that mentality? And then the next part that I wanted to go on to is how do the people that working within sort of the BNB chain, do you feel like you're a part of the Binance community and the Binance family, or do you feel like your own separate entity?
Actually, the other way around, and I'm not sure how CZ would feel about this answer. I feel like BNB chain is the larger world, and Binance is actually part of that ecosystem, right? Because if you think about it, right, Binance is a centralized exchange, right, where you trade tokens and so on. Obviously, it's a bit more functions in that. But when you think about the Web3 world, essentially everything in your life, right, when you look at your mobile phone and you look at all the apps there, right, whether it's the social media apps, whether it's the games that you play, whether it's the financial apps, these are all part of Web3, right? And probably the trading part of it is only one part of the ecosystem.
Sure.
So that's how I see it. The Binance is part of the BNB chain ecosystem. And I can understand why people think about it that way, the affiliation, because BNB after all started as Binance Coin, right? Started with the exchange itself. But when you think about today, right, BNB Chain itself is operated by, these 26 active validators, right? And in a way, it is a lot influenced by the community and by the validators, which, is not really CZ himself. So the separation has already happened. But, I think impressions takes a while to actually get there. But when you look at what's happening in BNB Chain, the communities, when you are in these communities talking to them and so on, you realize that that demarcation is actually there.
Interesting. That's a really interesting take indeed. And I'm going to have to sit with that for a little bit. But that makes a lot of sense, because I've always been feeling, and I was really happy to be able to ask you that question about how the people working on BNB Chain see the relationship with Binance. And obviously, I know you're not talking for everyone in the company there, but it's a really cool way of kind of looking at it, I feel. So in terms of like day to day, or even kind of on an annual basis, is CZ very much involved at all with BNB Chain? I know that publicly on Twitter, he's essentially said that he doesn't really know very much what's going on. He lets that team do its own thing. So what sort of exposure and sort of input does he have, if any?
To be honest, it's run, like BNB Chain is run quite independently. I hardly see any kind of like influence or like kind of decisions being put down on like the BNB Chain team itself. It is run pretty much in a decentralized way. The one thing I would say is, every time something big announcements happen, like yesterday, there's Greenfield and so on, we would always hope that CZ can help us to tweet.
Yeah.
So there are some advantages there, but I think in terms of like daily running and so on, it's pretty decentralized there.
Well, that's good. Let's say complete opposite of, say, how Elon Musk might be running this if it was a Tesla coin or something. So I'm sure you're quite grateful of having that space. So you've already sort of mentioned sort of briefly around the sort of the developer community on BNB Chain, but I just wanted to ask more specifically, how are you seeing the growth there? Is it a very active community? Are you seeing more developers coming on board?
Yep. We are definitely seeing more developers. I think when kind of the bear market was kind of playing out mid of last year, obviously, activity started to wane a little, but we're starting to see actually developers in other chains also being more interested in BNB Chain itself. That's one. And we're still continuing to see the increased interest from, Web2 firms, right? The developers coming from there to see, all right, they may have missed the whole wave of Web2, and can they actually kind of, go on an entrepreneurship journey, find a new use case that they can build in Web3. So we're seeing that. I think the other one is that as we see the ecosystem growing stronger, right? I think today, if you look at TVL itself, right, we're still solidly in number 2, right? Of course, Tron is up there as number 3, but if you look at the rest of the chains, we are about 4 to 5 times larger in liquidity. So there are certain competitive advantages that are very, very appealing to developers, right? For DeFi, it's a lot about volumes and trades, right? And now with Greenfield, right, I think that will open up a whole new economy for data ownership and monetization. And we hope to see a lot more builders coming with like cool, innovative ideas that have never been done in Web3 before, but can now materialize with this.
Fantastic. So just before we close off this podcast, do you want to tell us just a little bit more about what really makes you excited, potential use cases for this new announced Greenfield?
Sure. So it is, a decentralized storage infra, right? So within the broader BNB ecosystem, I think that's important to note, because you could have a storage layer that is not really connected. But if you think about it, right, storage is just storage, right? And because of the native cross-bridge communications and so on, you're now able to build all these applications in BSC, but be able to connect that to the storage layer in Greenfield itself. So one is, imagine a Dropbox, right? And you're able to kind of store you can have a UI, right? There's some BSC itself where your wallet and activities, the whole economy is there, right? And yet be able to say, all right, I want to store my data, and it seamlessly goes and be stored inside in Greenfield itself, where there are storage providers, right? And then there is things like data redundancy and so on that ensures that no one storage provider, right, is able to compromise the data. And then when you think about it, then it's also the ability to switch. Why I say that? So if you think about, say, mobile phone plans and so on, right? In the past, it used to be pretty expensive, and then more providers came in. But what really kind of shook up the industry was the ability to switch easily between the plans. And that is important. So today itself, right, well, there are many storage providers on Greenfield. As a Dropbox user, I can say, all right, now I want to contract a plan with storage provider A instead of storage provider B, and you're able to switch that after a contract plan is up. Maybe, right, that there's a lot of applications that could be out there. If you think about like music, right, you could have Spotify, but not just decentralizing the ownership of the NFTs, but the underlying asset of it, right? The music file itself can be decentralized in a way. So very excited about that. And I think it's, again, going to open up a new economy and many depths that we have not seen in Web3 so far.
So how do you see it in comparison to things like Arweave and IPFS? Are there any sort of specific USPs that differentiate it, or is it a similar implementation for the BNB chain?
Yeah, I think it's quite different. And like I said, you know, as a Web3 enthusiast, actually what we want to see is different models of because you want to provide options to developers and users. So how this was designed in principle is that we want it to be easy and seamless to use and be very close to the UX that developers and users are used to, say in AWS, right? When you sign up for AWS S3, right, the APIs that you use, that has to be quite similar to what is now, which I think in the current market, I don't think that is the case, right? So we build that with mind. That is one big thing. The other one is then, again, the seamless integration between BSC and Greenfield itself, right? So the validators and storage providers on Greenfield, but you're able to very seamlessly transfer and access the data, right, with permissions and so on between the blockchains. And I think that will be the huge part.
So it's more of a developer-focused benefit. Well, that's absolutely like fascinating, and thank you so much for joining me, Alvin. Just before we do close off, are there anything else that you think people should be looking out for over the coming months with BNB Chain?
Yep. So two things. I think one is we have lots of programs and support. So if you've been following, I've kickstarted a lot of these programs itself. We must have created about 3 or 4 like really flagship support programs for developers, right? So go to our site to check it out, whether it's kind of growth incentives, which are like gas fee incentives, whether it's kickstart programs to kind of connect you to different infra providers. I think those programs are out there for you, right? I think the second thing is there is, as part of the multi-chain strategy, right? There's ZKBNB, there's Greenfield. There will be, other things that will come up next time. And what this means is, new ecosystems means new opportunities, right? I know a lot of teams out there are looking for, all right, what's the next thing to build? What is the next thing, whether it's a new dApp or whether it's something that can complement the existing dApp. So do look out for these opportunities.
Brilliant. Well, stay tuned for more, I guess. Alvin, again, I've already said it about 3 times now, but it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
Same here.
What's the little teddy bear behind you, by the way? It's not. It's quite cute.
Yeah, so I actually can't remember where I bought it from. My wife loves bears. Unfortunately, I actually bought the first bear many years ago, and then my wife loves it. My kids love it. So you can easily find like 50 to 100 bears in my house.
I mean, as you can probably tell from my background, there's quite a lot of bears and other things in my office as well. So I feel you on that one. Okay, well, for this episode of the SlateCast, guys, I've been Akiba. Our guest Alvin Kan from BNB Chain has been absolutely superb, and we'll see you on the next one. Remember to like, follow, subscribe, all that algorithm-based stuff. It's important. So yeah, I've got to shill it. I'm sorry, but for this episode, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Bye, Alvin.
See ya.